You know, something rather unusual happens the moment a person truly begins to wake up. And I don't mean the casual sort of waking up people mention after a yoga class, or the pleasant clarity you get after a good night's sleep. No. I am speaking about the moment when the veil thins. When the familiar machinery of thought stops just long enough for you to glimpse what lies beneath it. When you suddenly see the game for what it is, and realize you had been taking shadows for substance your entire life. It is marvelous. Terrifying. Liberating. And utterly impossible to communicate. And yet, that is the first instinct, isn't it? The moment someone touches even a spark of awakening, their immediate impulse is to share it. To explain it. To shout it from rooftops. To try, in some desperate way, to pull others into the same light they have stumbled into. But here's the irony. Awakening gives you clarity, but it takes away your ability to explain that clarity in any literal sense. Because the truths you discover are not shaped like sentences. They are not ideas. They are not facts. They are experiences, and experiences cannot be transferred. This is why the first thing a spiritually awakened person must never share is 1. Your direct experience of awakening. The moment you awaken, even slightly, the world looks different. Something dissolves. Something opens. Something indescribable rearranges your perception, and suddenly everything is both profoundly simple and impossibly mysterious. And so you try to explain it. You say things like, there is no separate self. Everything is one movement. The thinker and the thought are the same thing. I saw through the illusion of me entirely. And what does the other person hear? Only words. Empty words. You could describe the ocean for hours to someone who has never touched water. But without the feeling of coolness, without the weight and flow, without the sensation of sinking and rising. Your explanation is just noise. Awakening is like that. You can point toward it, but you cannot transfer the taste. I once knew a man who had a sudden, profound shift while gardening at dusk. He said that for a brief moment, the boundary between him and the garden vanished completely. There was no gardener, no garden, only gardening. Only movement. Only process. He rushed inside to tell his wife. And she, busy with the ordinary tasks of ordinary life, said, "That's nice, dear. But please take out the trash." She wasn't being unkind. She had simply never felt what he was trying to describe. And therefore she could not receive it. This is why awakening cannot be shared as a story. The moment you make it a story, you turn it into a prize. Something you have that others don't. And immediately, though unintentionally, you create separation. Exactly the opposite of what awakening reveals. Awakening says, there is no separation. Explaining awakening says, I have something you do not. And so the awakened learn silence. Not because they are hiding anything. But because they know words can only distort what is essentially wordless. You can point to the moon. But if the other person becomes fascinated by your finger, they will never look up. 2. The practices or methods that worked for you. This one surprises many people. When something changes your life, you want to share the method. You want to help. You want to say, here, do exactly this, and you will wake up too. But spiritual practice doesn't work like that. Practice is medicine. And the medicine that heals one person can harm another. Some people awaken through meditation. Some through suffering. Some through inquiry. Some through devotion. Some through silence. Some through chaos. Some through no practice at all. There is no formula. There was once a student who told his teacher, Master, I have meditated exactly as you instructed for 5 years, and nothing has happened. The master laughed and replied, then stop meditating. The student was stunned. The master continued, Meditation is not awakening. It is only a tool for loosening knots. But you have begun to tie the knot tighter by meditating correctly. Stop trying to awaken, and notice that you are already awake. This is the trap. The moment you tell someone how you awakened, they turn your story into a technique. Your technique into a goal. And your goal into a future fantasy. But awakening is never in the future. It is always now. Always already happening. Nothing you did caused awakening. It happened when you stopped clutching at the illusion of a separate you who must achieve something. This is why awakened people do not preach methods. They may offer suggestions. But they never offer formulas. Because awakening is not a path. It is the end of the one who was walking the path. 3. Your ability to see into people's minds and motivations. Something very strange happens after awakening. You begin to see people clearly. Not their clothes, not their words, not their social masks. But the undercurrents beneath them. You can sense fear where someone pretends confidence. You can feel sorrow behind someone's smile. You see the little games people play to protect their image. You can see when someone is defending a story about themselves. You can see when someone is projecting their inner chaos onto the world. And the first impulse is to help. To point it out. To say, you're afraid. You're lying to yourself. You're defending an image that isn't real. But this is one of the gravest mistakes an awakened person can make. You cannot reveal a truth to someone who is not ready to see it. Truth must arise from within. It must arrive at the right time, from the right angle, through the right experience. If you push it onto someone too early, you don't liberate them. You trigger their defenses. I once had a friend who vented for weeks about how unfairly he was treated at work. And yes, I could clearly see the real issue. He was arrogant, dismissive, and impossible to collaborate with. But he wasn't asking for truth. He was asking for validation. If I had given him the truth then, he would not have grown. He would have been wounded, offended, defensive. Months later, he came to the realization himself. Naturally. Without force. This is how consciousness unfolds. A flower opens at its own pace. You cannot pry it open early without destroying it. So an awakened person learns restraint. They see deeply, but they speak lightly. They guide gently, without force. They allow the natural intelligence of consciousness to do the teaching. 4. Your understanding of emptiness, groundlessness, and the void. One of the strangest consequences of awakening is that the world stops feeling solid. Not unreal, but ungraspable. Fluid. More like a dance than a structure, more like a wave than a wall. You begin to see that everything you once believed was permanent. Your identity, your ambitions, your memories, your stories, is actually more like a pattern of ripples on the surface of water. Beautiful, but temporary. Meaningful, but not fixed. And deeper still, you see that even the self you thought was observing these ripples is not a thing. Not an entity. Not a someone. It is a movement. A happening. A process unfolding moment by moment. This realization is liberating. But only if you are ready for it. To a mind still seeking security. Still trying to define itself. Still trying to build a stable me. This truth feels like a cliff. A free fall. An existential earthquake. You tell someone. The self is not real. And they don't hear freedom. They hear annihilation. You say. Everything is empty of inherent existence. And they think you're saying life is meaningless. You say. There is no ground beneath anything. And they panic because they believe you are removing the very floor they stand on. This is why ancient teachers were extremely careful with teachings about emptiness. They knew this insight is the sharpest tool, capable of opening the mind or cutting it apart. Imagine taking a child who believes the floor is solid, and suddenly revealing that space-time is a fluctuating quantum field. Even if it's true, they cannot hold the truth without becoming frightened. Awakening is exactly like that. You see through the illusion of solidity. But you remain grounded because your identity is no longer built on that illusion. Someone who has never tasted this freedom will misunderstand your words. Not because they are unintelligent, but because they are trying to grasp a reality that can only be experienced, never conceptualized. I once told a colleague, unwisely, there is no fixed, you accomplishing anything. What you call yourself is a pattern, not a person. He looked at me as though I'd casually dissolved his entire existence. He wasn't ready. He heard destruction, not liberation. He heard chaos, not spaciousness. He heard meaninglessness, not freedom. And in that moment I learned. Truth given at the wrong time becomes poison. It wounds rather than heals. It shatters rather than opens. The awakened keep quiet. Not because they are guarding secrets, but because they understand this simple law of human consciousness. No truth can be received before its time. And no amount of explaining can accelerate that timing. 5. Your sense of freedom from conventional morality and rules. This is the most misunderstood aspect of awakening. When the illusion of the separate self dissolves, you see that all the rules you grew up with, moral codes, cultural norms, social expectations, are not laws of the universe. They are agreements, stories, shared fantasies that help society function. And when you truly awaken, you realize you are not bound by these stories. You can break them. You can follow them. Neither option has inherent morality until intention enters the picture. But try explaining this to someone who still believes morality comes from external authority. From God, society, tradition, or fear of punishment. If you say, I am free from conventional morality, they hear, I'm about to become dangerous. They think freedom means chaos. That absence of rule means absence of compassion. But the awakened person knows something subtler. When you see that all beings are expressions of the same consciousness, harming another becomes as absurd as punching your own hand. Kindness becomes natural. Compassion becomes instinctual. Not because a rule says so, but because unity reveals it. But if you try to verbalize this to someone still living in a rigid moral framework, they panic. They assume you're secretly immoral, or secretly unstable, or secretly planning something awful. This is why awakened people often continue to follow the conventions of society outwardly. Not because they believe in them, but because there is no benefit in frightening others. They pay bills. They obey traffic laws. They say, thank you, and sorry. Because these little rituals keep the social machinery running smoothly. They live in the world. But they are not of it. They play the game. But they remember it is a game. They follow the rules. But they are not ruled by them. A master actor does not ruin the play by refusing to wear the costume. He wears it intentionally, knowing it is only a costume. That is the awakened person. So what does all of this mean? It means that awakening brings clarity. But it also brings responsibility. A responsibility to remain quiet when speaking would harm. A responsibility to allow people to awaken in their own time. A responsibility to avoid using truth as a weapon. A responsibility to protect others from truths they are not yet equipped to hold. Awakening is not just a shift in perception. It is a shift in how you move in the world. You stop shouting spiritual truths from rooftops. You stop trying to convert people. You stop trying to explain the unexplainable. Instead, you live it. Quietly. Naturally. Authentically. People feel it before they understand it. Your presence becomes the teaching. Your silence becomes instruction. Your way of being becomes the invitation. Words point. Presence reveals. Why these 5 things cannot be shared. Now you might wonder. If these truths are so essential, so transformative, why shouldn't we share them? Why keep quiet? It seems counterintuitive, especially if awakening brings compassion. Shouldn't compassion be expressed by sharing what helped you awaken? But here's the paradox. The deepest truths cannot be transmitted through speech. They can only be recognized. A truth heard too early becomes confusion. A truth heard too late becomes irrelevant. A truth heard at the perfect moment becomes awakening. And the awakened understand not only truth, but timing. 1. Because awakening is not an idea, it is a shift in being. You can tell someone about nonduality. You can describe emptiness. You can talk about spacious awareness. But unless they have already tasted even one drop of that recognition, your words will sound like riddles or madness. Imagine trying to explain the taste of honey to someone who has never tasted sweetness. You can describe it poetically, golden, warm, delicate. But nothing matches the actual flavor on the tongue. Similarly, awakening is a flavor. It must be tasted first, then the words make sense. Before tasting, the mind interprets everything through ego. An ego cannot comprehend its own absence. This is why sharing awakening prematurely often backfires. Your words become distorted by the listener's unconscious fears, desires, and assumptions. And instead of clarity, confusion grows. 2. Because sharing spiritual experiences creates hierarchy. The moment you speak of your awakening, you unknowingly create division. You over here, the awakened. Them over there, the unawakened. This is the opposite of awakening. Awakening reveals that there is no you or them. Only one consciousness appearing as many. But the ego loves comparison. It grabs onto your words and begins constructing a spiritual identity. I am more awakened. I am on a higher level. I am more evolved. This turns spirituality into a competition. Which is precisely the trap awakening dissolves. The awakened remain silent because silence prevents hierarchy. It prevents spiritual ego from forming around their presence. It prevents the ancient poison of, I am above you, from entering the room. 3. Because words cannot carry what presence can. A child does not learn kindness because you lecture them. They learn because they feel kindness in your presence. Likewise, nobody awakens because you explain enlightenment. People awaken because your being creates a space where awakening is possible. Presence communicates what words cannot. A quiet person who has found inner peace teaches more deeply than 1,000 spiritual speeches. Their calm is contagious. Their simplicity is instructive. Their way of walking, breathing, listening. That is the teaching. When you are awake, your silence says what your words never could. 4. Because psychological safety must come before spiritual truth. Imagine giving a child a math equation far beyond their level. It does not help them. It overwhelms them. Awakening works the same way. Before someone can hear deep truth, they must feel safe. Emotionally, psychologically, existentially. Someone still clinging to a fragile identity cannot hear the truth that identity is an illusion. It will shatter them. Or make them defensive. Or send them spiraling into existential crisis. The awakened recognize this and protect others by withholding truths. Until the ground is stable enough to receive them. This is not secrecy. This is compassion. 5. Because the ego is clever and will misuse spiritual information. Here is a subtle danger. The ego does not disappear when it hears spiritual truth. Instead, it adopts it. Someone hears, everything is empty. And the ego turns it into nihilism. A reason to avoid responsibility. Someone hears, there is no self. And the ego turns it into spiritual arrogance. A reason to justify selfishness. Someone hears, I am free from morality. And the ego uses it to rationalize destructive behavior. This is why the awakened do not share their freedom recklessly. Freedom without understanding becomes license. License becomes chaos. Chaos becomes suffering. The awakened never want to empower someone's illusions. So they remain quiet until the listener is ready to hear truth responsibly. The wisdom of timing. In every tradition, Zen, Taoism, mysticism, the teacher does not give the deepest teaching because the student asks. They give it because the student has become capable. Capacity comes before content. This is why ancient masters used paradox, silence, koans, or even laughter, to guide students gently to the edge of truth, without pushing them over the cliff. They understood that awakening is not taught. It is caught. Like a spark jumping from one flame to another. And this spark does not ignite through argument, philosophy, logic, or doctrine. It ignites through presence, timing, readiness, and inner maturity. The awakened person sees this clearly. Which is why they share lightly. Gently. Symbolically. Never aggressively. Never insistently. Never prematurely. The beauty of quiet awakening. The deepest irony of the spiritual path is this. The more awakened you become, the less interest you have in talking about awakening. Not because you're hiding anything, but because you finally understand. That awakening isn't in the words. It's in the listening behind the words. It's in the silence between the words. It's in the space where no words are needed. You live your truth quietly. Naturally. Humbly. And those who are ready feel it. Long before they understand it. The fifth thing you must never share, your sense of ultimate freedom. There is one more thing, the most subtle and dangerous of all. That the spiritually awake must never openly share. Your sense of ultimate freedom. Not moral freedom. Not political freedom. Not psychological freedom. But the profound recognition that you are not constrained by the mental rules humanity has created for itself. Once awakening deepens, you see that most rules are just agreements. Most morality is contextual. Most social norms are invented. Most identities are masks. Most duties are inherited illusions. Most expectations are imaginary obligations we silently accepted without question. But if you announce this freedom to people who still depend on the structure of the game, you will terrify them. Not because you are doing anything wrong, but because they interpret your freedom through the lens of their fear. To someone who still believes that morality is enforced from outside, either by God, or society, or law, your inner freedom sounds like rebellion, or danger, or chaos. They imagine. If he no longer believes in the rules, he might do anything. But the awakened know the opposite is true. When you truly awaken, harming others becomes as absurd as harming yourself. It's not morality. It's not virtue. It's not discipline. It's not obedience. It's clarity. When you see through the illusion of separation. When you see that self and other are two waves in the same ocean. Compassion becomes as natural as breathing. You don't avoid hurting others because a rule says you must not. You avoid hurting others because it would be like punching your own reflection in the mirror. This cannot be taught. This cannot be argued. This cannot be explained to someone who still believes morality is enforced from above. This is why awakened people rarely talk about their freedom. They quietly follow social norms where needed. Not because they believe in them, but because disrupting the illusion unnecessarily helps no one. It is far more compassionate to move gently than to overwhelm someone with truths they are not ready to integrate. The enlightened person follows the rules outwardly. But inwardly they rest in a freedom beyond rules. A freedom that expresses itself as kindness, ease, and natural harmony. Why silence is the greatest teaching of all. By now, you may be wondering. If we shouldn't share awakening, shouldn't share methods, shouldn't share insights, shouldn't share emptiness, and shouldn't share our ultimate freedom, then what do we share? The awakened share something far more powerful than words. Presence. Words divide. Presence unifies. Words confuse. Presence clarifies. Words can be misunderstood. Presence cannot. When someone sits with a truly awakened person, they feel something, even if nothing is said. A sense of calm. A spaciousness. A quietness that is not empty but full. Full of awareness, acceptance, non-resistance. The awakened person becomes like still water. Whoever comes near sees their own reflection clearly. This is the highest form of teaching. Not preaching. Not lecturing. Not convincing. Not saving. Just being. The paradox of awakening: you cannot share it, yet it is shared. You cannot give enlightenment to anyone. You cannot push them into clarity. You cannot awaken them through explanations. And yet, when you awaken, others around you begin to awaken too. Not because you told them anything, but because your being becomes a mirror. And they begin to see themselves reflected truthfully. Your silence becomes a transmission. Your stillness becomes an invitation. Your authenticity becomes a reminder of their own forgotten nature. The awakened person becomes like a lighthouse. Silent, unmoving, shining. And those lost at sea navigate by the light. Light does not call out. Light does not instruct. Light simply is. This is how awakening is shared. Quietly, naturally, without effort. Why you must honor each person's timing. Every soul awakens on its own schedule. Not sooner. Not later. A flower cannot bloom because another flower tells it to. The bloom happens when the conditions within are ready. If you try to force a flower open, you destroy it. If you try to force someone's awakening, you injure their psyche. This is why awakened beings are infinitely patient. They trust life's timing more than their own desire to help. They know that some people are not ready to let go of their story. Some people are not ready to see through their illusions. Some people still need their suffering. Some people still need the identity they cling to. Some people still believe the dream is real. And forcing truth upon them would be like waking someone abruptly from a deep sleep. They will wake frightened, confused, disoriented. Awakening must be gentle. Natural. Self-arising. The awakened person simply waits. With the quiet confidence that when the seed is ready, it will break open. Not before. The beauty of living quietly awake. You learn to walk softly. To speak gently. To act naturally. To love freely. To listen deeply. Not because you are trying to be spiritual, but because every action flows from clarity. Your laughter has a different sound. Your silence has a different warmth. Your presence feels unmistakably peaceful. People sense something in you. Not something dramatic or mystical, but something profoundly simple. You are at ease with existence. You are no longer fighting life. You are no longer fighting yourself. This is the true mark of awakening. Not visions. Not powers. Not dramatic revelations. Just a quiet alignment with what is. A falling into harmony with the universe you once believed you were separate from. The final secret: awakening cannot be hidden. Here is the final irony. You cannot share awakening. But you also cannot hide it. Your words may be silent. But your being speaks loudly. Those who are ready will hear you even when you say nothing. Those who are not ready will not hear you even when you speak endlessly. This is why the awakened learn to trust life entirely. They stop trying to enlighten others. They stop trying to convince. They stop trying to teach. Because they finally understand what all the sages, mystics, and masters meant. The truth is not taught. The truth is recognized. And when the student is ready, the teacher appears. Often as silence.